Welcome back to this week's edition of The Decision 2024. All the polls, all the votes, and Valuetainment's own estimate of how we think the presidential election is going to shake out, thanks to VT Analytics. I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc.
I'm Amy Dangerfield, and we're very excited to bring you into this week's numbers. A lot has changed, and guys, words talk, but numbers scream. First, let's get into the headlines. For starters, Barack Obama and Michelle finally endorsed Kamala Harris for president. This dispels a lot of the rumors that they didn't quite think she was capable of living up to the job. Second to that, she raised over $100 million in campaign funds. Some say it's a little bit closer to 200 if you count all the super PACs and that dark money. And then finally, we're going to be talking about the Kamala Bounce today. We have seen a bump in the polls since she became the presumptive nominee. And that's what we're going to dive into first, Tom.
Let's go take a look at what a bounce is all about. Take a look at this chart. This goes back to look at the Clinton versus Trump bounces that happened over the course of the summer around the time of their conventions. If the Trump line goes down, he's gaining momentum. If the Hillary Clinton line goes up, she's gaining momentum. And then back to the center is where they were in the first place. So you see, Trump got a bump. That's a positive 3 to 4 percentage pop in the polls. But then he comes back to the neutral line where it started. Hillary Clinton, that convention was some weeks later. So you see, nothing was happening. She had her bump. Then they came down, and guess what? They ran to election day, and we remember how close the election was. So that's what a bounce is. It's usually not permanent. There's enthusiasm, there's momentum, but then it returns back. Partly because a lot of independent people respond a little bit initially. The entrenched people don't move at all. And you get this movement in the middle, but it ultimately comes back to say, what did you keep? So normally, if you see a positive bounce from a convention, the winning candidate, if you look back, it's usually bounce 4, keep 1 to 1.5, win the election. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Now let's go see what's up with the enthusiasm and what's up with the bounce for Kamala, if any, this week. Let's go look at the national polls, Amy.
Since Kamala has become the presumptive nominee, she has seen a little bit of a bump in the national polls. Trump does maintain his 2% lead. It's actually 2.1 at this point. However, we can see there graphically that she did have a little bit of a bump. That being said, Tom, national polls aren't what decide elections. So let's take a look at the swing states and see what bumps she had over on that side of things.
Here's the top 4, or among the top 4. We start over here, and you can see Harris pulled up in Wisconsin. That's what you'd expect. Traditionally blue Wisconsin, despondent about Biden's performance in the debate. They pull up a little bit. Then also in Michigan, but you also see Trump had a bounce as well as a result of the assassination attempt. But look, he also had a bounce at the same time she had a bounce. So guess what's also happening? People know the two candidates, and there's less coming up for Kennedy. We'll look at that in just a second. Tell us about Pennsylvania and Georgia.
When it comes to Pennsylvania, we did a little bit of a deep dive last week, and Trump was maintaining over a 4-point lead over there. Things have changed a little bit, Tom, due to the Kamala bounce. Now Trump is only maintaining a 2.6% lead, however, still slightly leaning Trump. When it comes to Georgia, definitely still even lesser of a bump than the ones previous. Trump is maintaining his 4.4% lead. However, graphically, we can see that little Kamala bounce right there.
So we're seeing some enthusiasm, we're seeing some bounce. So let's go take a look at multiple swing states, and we're going to talk a little bit about when and how you see bounces. What's going on here, Amy? It doesn't look like there's a lot of polls that have actually been taken.
Right you are, Tom. 11 national polls were conducted. But when it comes to these swing states, the battleground states that really decide the election, guys, we have single-digit polls available. In some of the states, Nevada, we actually have 0 available. So the data isn't super clear right now, Tom.
So you can see the limited number of polls, the limited number of ability to measure the shift means we're unable to fully measure the shift. And we have some of our own polling data, too, that we pile into VT Analytics and make our own assessments. And we've got the same thing. A little bit more time. We need about another week. We think next week there's going to be a lot of bounce data. However, there's plenty to dive into this week. Where are we now on a national basis? It's normalizing. What do I mean by that? Take a look. The Libertarian, the Green, and Kennedy are all retreating back to what has been historical nominal numbers. Why? Because everybody says there's 99 days to the election, it's go time, and look at what we've got. Not much has changed. It's still 1.8 on a national basis. So it's normalizing. The independents are coming home to one of the two major parties rather than, as people will say, oh, don't waste your vote, make a selection. And it looks like the independents are, as the minor party candidates are backing off. Now then, what have we got, Amy? What does this look like? Even with these limited polls, the battleground is shaping up.
Yes, and things are moving so much week by week by week. What we can see is now we potentially have 8 battleground states. Of course, we have Nevada and Arizona on the West Coast, the typical blue wall and Georgia. However, Virginia and New Hampshire have become a part of the party. They are now included in the 8 battleground states.
And all battlegrounds aren't created equally. Some of these are tighter than others, and some of them are true toss-ups at this hour. But nonetheless, they're all in striking distance of one another, even if there's a good amount of lean. So let's take a look at Arizona. We promised you a deep dive into Arizona last week, so take us through.
Yeah, so let's take a look back to the previous election. As we can see, it's a little bit of a mixed bag here, pretty spread out 50-50. However, the size of the relative victory is really what we need to take into account here. When we take a look at the bigger cities, Phoenix, Tucson, we can see that the proportion of their winnings were much higher, these more largely populated, condensed areas versus the rest of Arizona, Tom.
And when you put it together, that's why it's 50-50, a true battleground at this hour. Now then, Arizona is historically red.
Arizona has been a Republican stronghold going back before the year 2000. As we can see, it was actually given to the Dems for the first time in the year 2020. But what's really interesting is when you take a look back at these last 2 election cycles, as you can see, the Republicans were able to secure around the same amount of votes, 48.7% compared to 49.1%. The real point of difference is on the Democratic side, and where it really comes into play is this independent vote or this protest vote that occurred during the 2016 election. So we can see that a large majority of that actually went to the Dems in 2020 during the COVID lockdowns. And there was a lot that was going on at that point. Now, will it play out the same in 2024? The landscape has shifted quite a lot, so I say probably not. But words talk, numbers scream. So we'll have to wait and see.
Now then, let's go even deeper into Arizona. There's about 7.36 million people living there, but you can say there's 1.2 registered Democrats, 1.2 million, 1.4 million Republicans, and 1.4 million other, that's independents, along with 30,000 people that just say, I am libertarian. 4.1 million registered votes. So when you hear about, let's go register voters and let's go get out the vote, here's why. 4.1 are registered, 7.36 in the state. So there's 3.2, 3.3 million that people still want to get registered. Now then, we dove in, and these are the issues in this order that Arizonans are talking about. They say immigration is number 1. This is an important issue in Arizona. Here's why. Most voters agree on the immigration. Why? Because they're experiencing it live. They see people camped out on streets, under overpasses, panhandling for money, and they attribute a lot of that to the undocumented immigrants that have overwhelmed the state coming across the southern border. Next was inflation in the economy. It turns out age 50 plus is the largest voting bloc in Arizona, with a ton of retired people. So inflation in the economy on fixed income, you have your Social Security, a little bit from your IRA, maybe a small pension, you don't get raises every year. You're not still working. You're not going to get a bonus this year. So when inflation happens, it really hurts your retirement. And age 50 plus is the largest voting bloc in Arizona. Lastly, then there was women's rights, abortion. The state legislature passed something, then it got unpassed, and then it got overrode by court. So there was controversy that made headlines, but make no mistake, the top 2 is immigration and the economy, based on who comprises these 4.1 million registered voters. Now, take us through the bounce. Is there even a bounce?
Not really. When we take a look at what we were seeing last week compared to this week, Tom, we are seeing Trump maintain a very solid lead in all of the polls that we're seeing here, maintaining anywhere between a 5% lead all the way up to an 8% lead.
So the enthusiasm for a female woman of color as your candidate is not yet showing up in the Arizona polling because these issues are much hotter here than they are in other areas. Compared the heat and intensity of an Arizona voter on immigration to a Missouri voter. What's happening in your backyard and your front yard and on the streets of your town with all of these immigrants coming through is live and in living color in Arizona, where it's a more theoretical argument in Missouri.
So now we're actually going to dive into the crosstabs. This is very important because it helps us break down the demographics and really get a more thorough understanding of who is voting for which candidate and why. What demographic do they fall into? So Tom, what can you tell us about some of the crosstabs that we're seeing here?
The first thing you do in any crosstab is you look at the male-female split. 800 voters, but 384 male, 416 female. So when you read things about women's rights and abortion, you might think, wow, look what's Arizona. It's 2 points off everyone else, maybe 2 points more intense. Wait a minute, you got to understand what that total skew is. You also take a look at what are the races. Hispanic, 136, white was 568. So there's also going to be a Caucasian skew. So you step back and now you take a look, 392 were 65 or over. So almost half of it was over. Well, why is that important? They're the largest voting bloc. If you know that, then you make all these comparisons, but crosstabs will tell you everything. And when you see polling data and there's any links for crosstabs, go take a look at it and familiarize yourself with it, because you'll see that what they may be saying on CNN or Fox or Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal about the polls and about the things they're seeing, you look at a crosstab and you wait a minute, there's only 400 people that were in that poll, and they've got a slight female skew and they've got a slight African-American or Hispanic skew. You say, wait a minute, that poll is good for headlines and a pollster got paid, but it may not be a perfect representation. This is how you can look into the crosstabs and see for yourself. Now let's go back to where are we now on the consensus map that major pollsters and people that are just averaging numbers are looking at.
When it comes to the swing states, what really wins an election, we still have Nevada and Arizona leaning Trump. This has been a consistency throughout this election. However, where we have seen a lot of movement is in the blue wall. This particular battleground right here, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. As we've seen, a week can make such a difference. Last week, Pennsylvania was leading by 4 points. Now it's down to only 2.6, and they remain in play at striking distance. The other two battlegrounds that really weren't battlegrounds prior to this are going to be Virginia and New Hampshire. We are seeing these two within striking distance as well. And then finally, Georgia, which is for the most part leaning Trump.
This, again, is the consensus. And the consensus is saying Georgia is a toss-up. I'm not so sure about that personally. Virginia is a toss-up. I'm not so sure about that either. We're going to apply our assessment to it right now.
Yes, and so with 14 weeks to go, this is the Valuetainment Call, the culmination of all of the data here, other pollsters, and our own aggregate. Tom, what are we seeing for the Valuetainment Call?
Well, with 14 weeks to go, 99 days until the election, we still see about a 65% probability for now. Last week, that probability was closer to 80%, but we are seeing some change in certain polls, and we got to keep looking at that because the voters are not static. They're living, breathing, assessing, and evaluating what they see. But right now, we are in the Kamala Bounce period. Even though it hasn't been as big of a bounce as a convention, that DNC convention is coming up, and it's sure to have a bounce. For right now, the way we look at it is, we are too quick to call on Virginia, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, and Michigan, but we think Virginia and New Hampshire are closer in terms of toss-ups to going back to a light lean Dem than they are to Trump at this hour. However, Georgia and Arizona, we feel are pretty tight because we're looking at the crosstabs, the issues that matter to those people. As we pointed out, just because you have a female woman of color doesn't mean the Arizona people are seeing an improvement to the economy for a tremendous retired vote and a change to the immigration that's affecting every citizen that walks out their front door in Arizona. We think it's still tight at 287 because we think on balance, Pennsylvania is still leaning Trump. Will it stay that way after the convention? We'll go take a look at it, and we will be back next week to do that and more with a deep dive on Nevada. Until then, I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc.
I'm Amy Dangerfield, and remember, words talk, but numbers scream. We'll see you on the next episode.